Minister. The member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
My question is to the Premier. Premier, last week's auditor's report on winter road maintenance points directly at the continued lack of accountability being shown by your government and, more specifically, by yourself. For 5 years, your government knowingly risked the lives of Ontario motorists to save a few bucks. For 5 years, continued lax standards meant uncleared roads that were the direct result of your government's flawed cost-cutting contracts. Premier, you were Minister of Transportation for 2 of those 5 years. Admit it, you knew about it and you did nothing about it. Can you tell those families forever impacted by your government's lack of oversight when you, as Transportation Minister, first knew about the impacts and why you failed to act?
You know, Mr. Speaker, the premise of the member's question is absolutely not accurate.
The member from Lanark.
The fact is, Mr. Speaker,
The member from Lanark come to order. The member from Stormont come to order, and the member from Oxford come to order. Carry on.
just to put this in perspective, when I first became Minister of Transportation, one of the things I did was I visited area offices and I asked questions about the contracts, Mr. Speaker. And quite frankly, I asked questions of our staff to make sure that the standards that had been in place before the Conservative government put their new model in place were the same standards as we were using after the contracts were put in place, Mr. Speaker. That was a fundamental question that I asked repeatedly. There were concerns that were raised, Mr. Speaker, and the reason that there was a review that was begun in 2013 was that we had started to ask questions about whether there needed to be changes made to make sure that the system that had been put in place by them was actually working, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Oh, no, Premier, you changed the standards. You watered them down to the point where you put Ontarians' lives at risk. You did that. You asked the questions, but you failed to actually listen to the people, and I'll tell you why. What's most concerning is, in fact, your government did know. The auditor's report uncovers the fact that ministry staff were sounding the warning bells, but government failed to listen.
Deputy House Leader.
Page 26 of the report provides a list of some of the concerns from ministry staff. Here are 3. The equipment complement does not appear to be adequate. There is insufficient equipment to service all lanes. Route may have insufficient equipment to plow all lanes and shoulders on 401. Premier, how many of these concerns were raised and then Transportation Minister Kathleen Wynne, and why did you fail to act?
Mr. Speaker, and I know the Minister of Transportation is going to want to speak to some specifics, but the member opposite will recognize that the very reason that we were buying more equipment, we were putting more inspectors in place, Mr. Speaker, is because we wanted to make sure that our record of having the safest roads in North America.
The member from Lanark, second time. The member from Timmins, James Bay, second time. Carry on, please.
The reason, Mr. Speaker, that more equipment was bought, that there was an internal review begun, was to make sure that we retained our record of having the safest roads in North America, because, Mr. Speaker, we knew that we were capable of having that standard in place, and that's the standard that we will retain, Mr. Speaker.
Premier, 5 years,
final supplementary.
5 years, way too late. Way too late. We're talking about the safety of Ontario motorists. We're talking about preventable fatalities that government failed to guard against. November 3rd, 2010, you boasted in this House, quote, "We obviously work with regional offices to make sure that the oversight of those contracts is in place." So why weren't you listening when those same regional offices told you they just weren't working? Again, you stood in the House and told us we wouldn't be doing this if safety were at question. We wouldn't be doing it if quality was going to go down. Well, last week, the auditor made it very clear. Quality did go down, and the safety of Ontario motorists were, in fact, put at risk. Premier, I'll give you one more chance. Come clean today. What did you know, and why did you fail to act?
Apologize.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Speaker. I thank the member for that question. In addition to what I said earlier in response to his leader with respect to the internal review from 2013, which led to the 105 additional pieces of equipment and all those other positive steps that we took, which, by the way, Speaker, were acknowledged in the auditor's report last week with respect to showing progress. In addition to that, Speaker, last week I announced that within 60 days, I will report back on additional findings from an internal review that we're conducting. And secondly, Speaker, in order to make sure that we drive accountability on this, because it is an important issue, I have asked the auditor to come back within 1 year at the end of winter 15-16 and provide an update so as to gauge all of our progress. Thanks very much, Speaker.